Hello and welcome to my channel. I just felt like y'all needed a dramatic entrance for my first video. I'm Lydia. Hi. And I am going to show you today how to make a basic t-shirt block. A block is a basic foundational pattern that doesn't have any seam allowance and is able to be altered into different styles. You could turn it into a turtleneck, a t-shirt dress, a turtleneck dress, a bodycon dress. You can do all kinds of things. So just bear with me, follow through with this video to the end. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we? I've chosen a regular fit t-shirt, which means it's in between an oversized fit and a slim fit. Start by folding your t-shirt with the front facing out. Make sure all the seams are flat. You can pin these in place. Fold your paper in half and place the fold of the t-shirt on the fold of the paper and line up the t-shirt hem with the straight edge of the paper. Use weights to hold it in place. I forgot mine, as you can see. You can use parchment paper, wrapping paper, or tape together newspapers if you don't want to buy tracing paper. Trace around the t-shirt with a pencil, marking where the underarm meets the sleeve, where the shoulder meets the sleeve, and where the shoulder meets the neckline seam. To mark the armhole and neckline, place your fingernail on the seam, fold up, and mark where your fingernail is placed. You can do this for the neckline as well. Or you can take a tracing wheel, make sure you get a sharp one, and you can trace right through, following the armhole seam, and this will poke little holes in the paper so you don't have to flip up the fabric. You can just keep it in place, and it's very accurate this way. These are about $8 on Amazon. Repeat this entire step for the back, but this time make sure you fold your t-shirt with the back facing out. And take note that the back armhole will be less of a deep curve just because your back is wider than your front in that area. Once you have both back and front traced, place your front piece down and place the back on top of it. Line up the shoulder seam and adjust the back to match with the front. It should be the same length. Also, line up the side seam and copy the curve of the side seam onto the back. Make sure it's also the same height. Mine is a little bit longer, so I shortened it. Then you will want to connect all of your markings. I'm using a French curve and a hip curve to create really smooth lines, but you can just freehand this. It's not a big deal. Before you cut out, just make sure that you tape the two sides of the folded paper together so it doesn't move around when you cut. Next, you will want to measure the distance of your bust, waist, and hip from your shoulder at the neckline. Wear a fitted t-shirt and tie a string at your bust, your waist, and your hip. Make sure the strings are level to the floor and are tied at the fullest part of your bust and hip and the smallest indent of your waist, just under your ribs. Measure from the shoulder seam at the neckline of your t-shirt down to your bust line, then waist, and then hip, and note these measurements because we are going to transfer them to the block. Take your front pattern block and measuring from the shoulder neck point, mark the length of your bust and waist, and if your t-shirt passes your hips, mark that measurement as well. Draw a perpendicular line from the fold of your pattern to create your bust and waistline. Then you're going to want to transfer it to the back by lining up the bottom hem and the side seam and then just transferring those markings. And I'm repeating the same thing. Then you just want to label them bust and waist. Now for the sleeve. Take your paper and draw a straight line with a ruler. Make sure the shoulder seam and underarm seam is flat. I've pinned mine in place. Then line up the front side of your t-shirt sleeve with the line as shown and use weights to keep it in place. Flatten the sleeve area and draw a line at the hem that is perpendicular from your original vertical line that you drew. Then trace around the underarm seam, and I'm marking where the underarm line and the shoulder lines stop. Then I'm putting my mat underneath. You can just use cardboard. And I'm taking my tracing wheel and tracing along the armhole. If you don't have a tracing wheel, you can also use a method I showed you earlier where you place your fingernail on the seam and fold up the fabric and mark it with a pencil. Then you just want to mark this with an F because it's the front. And then repeat all of those steps for the back. Mark it with a B. I'm now filling in the markings that I made, and then I'm just roughly cutting it out. And we are now going to walk the seams, which means that we are going to make sure they line up to each other. So take the front body, also called bodice, and match up the center line of the sleeve with the front shoulder and walk the front side of the sleeve seam with the front armhole line. As I'm doing here, I'm just placing my nail on the edge of the line, lining it up with that armhole, and you'll see that I have a 1/4 inch longer, so I'm going to mark where the front body stops. Then I'm going to repeat this step for the back. So lining up the center line at the shoulder, the back shoulder, and I am walking the edge of the lines down, and there's about 5/8 extra on that one. So now I'm just going to make the new line where I marked that is parallel to the old line. Make sure that these new underarm seam lines you drew are also the same length. Mine are good. They're both about 1 inch. For the neckline piece, we are going to fold our neckline from the center and lay out straight, measure the length, and take note that you're only measuring half of the full length. We're going to transfer this to a heavier paper that is folded so that we only have to measure out half, and your dimensions will be 1 inch times the length that you measured. Now I am taping it together before I cut it out so it doesn't move around. I'm going to now mark the grain line, which is right on the center fold, and the arrows show that it's there, and then I'm labeling it neck ribbing. I'm going to transfer everything to hard paper because it will be really helpful for when you are using this to make other patterns. So here I am tracing out my sleeve with a tracing wheel, and I'm able to go right through the paper. This is the most ideal because you will be able to use your tracing paper, add seam allowance, and that's your t-shirt pattern. You can cut that out. I'm just going to freehand filling in all of those little markings I made. Marking that center line, that's crucial, front and back, Then I'm going to label with those arrows to show the grain line. That's my top center notch that matches up with the shoulder seam, and I label it. I am now transferring my front and back pattern block to the hard paper. I've folded the heavier paper in half, and I'm just transferring the shape and even the bust and waist lines. I'm taping these together so that when I cut, it doesn't move around. And when I open this up, I'm going to label everything, label the grain line along the fold and everything else. So here I have the back, the front, and I've labeled everything as I said. And now you're done! Ta-da! Woohoo! Celebrate if you got this far. That's amazing. Good job. Wow, 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 wow. You made it to the end of this video. And that is quite the accomplishment. Am I right? Or am I right? I'm right. So, what's next? Only this gorgeous turtleneck. I took the block that I made in this tutorial and I adjusted it and I made this. And I'm going to show you how to do it in my next tutorial. Yes, you can do it too. So, stay tuned, come back, comment, let me know, ask me questions. I'm happy to give you any advice that I have. Anyway, bye!